So, yeah, welcome everyone. I will first welcome you to the Build a Snake in JavaScript workshop. And if you're new to Monash, welcome to Monash as well. Before we start today's event, I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today. My name is Anna, and I am the Events Co-Director at Monash Association of Coding, which we call MAC for short. And thank you so much for coming today. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our club and who we are. So we're a coding club, and we focus on imparting valuable technical skills and industry relevant experience to students. Our ultimate goal is to foster the programming culture at Monash and provide a collaborative setting for students to do projects together and also learn from one another. And we do this by delivering technical workshops like this one today. And what sets us apart is that everything that we do produces a result at the end of the day that adds value to both your academic and career journeys. And a little bit about me. I'm a fourth and penultimate year software engineering and arts student. And over the previous summer, I interned at Google as part of their student trainee in engineering program, also known as their STEP internship, where I did a lot of web development, which involved obviously HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which we will also be using in today's session. Before we, the first thing that we'll do is that we'll do a quick run through of the schedule. So I'll share my screen. Oh, where is the share screen button? It is here. So, so first of all, we will do a walkthrough of the code and take any questions that you have, and then we'll do feature one, and then we will do feature one and we'll add a scoreboard, and then we'll do feature two and we'll add pause and start buttons, and then if we have time, we'll do feature three, which will add just combine the pause and start button together into one button. And then what you'll be referring to today is the notes, which you will share in the chat, which will be shared in the chat right now. And then within that, you will have all the notes, all the things that you'll be referring to today. Okay, I'm going to just share the code screen, but the first thing you want to do is to go to the top of your notes. Hopefully, first of all, can I get a reactions on how many people have access to the notes? Yes, thank you, Jade. And I think, cool, looks like some of you can see the notes. That's good. And then the next thing, so you want to go to the very top of your screen and then go to the GitHub repository link. So I'll share my screen again, and then I'll show you how to access the code. So you want to go to the link here. Hopefully you can see my screen. And then, am I sharing the right screen? You guys can see my screen,
yeah,
right?
We can.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Sorry. And then you go to the GitHub repository here. And then what you want to do is that you want to go to the code button on the side here and then download zip. And then you would unzip that, and that would have everything that you want to, all the files that you need for today. And then while you're doing that, I wanted to go over some housekeeping for today's session. So if you have any questions, obviously send it in the Zoom chat. And if you have any bugs in your code or any issues with the code, then you can message either Roy or Robbie or Robert in the direct message them, or you can just simply message in the Zoom chat and they will invite you to one of the breakout rooms that I've set up, and you can go, and then they will help you with debugging. But other than that, we'll get started. So I will share my code again, and we'll begin with a run through of what the code is all about. So can I get knowing some of you are new to Monash completely. So I'm just wondering, are you guys familiar with JavaScript, or with web development? So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Have you done it before? Thumbs up if you have, or yes in the chat. Oh, nice. Some of you have. That's great. Cool. Hope that's good, because that means that I won't have to go as slowly through the different parts of the code. But first of all, we'll have the HTML file, and what that is, so that will just very basically just has the headings, and you could change this name to your name, and so like a byline saying who made it, and then a game canvas that shows the game, and then this stuff we'll be adding a bit later in our when we actually do the features. But what that looks like, if I was to show you the game, is that it looks like this. So we'll have the page with the heading and then the actual game here. And then when you start playing the game, you can see that the snake moves, and then you can eat the apple and you get a longer snake. And then hopefully by the end of today, you'll also be able to pause the game and start the game as you want to. But that's the HTML file. Then the next thing I wanted to show you, so the CSS file looks like this, but I won't be going in detail through that. It's just styling and it's optional, it doesn't affect the functionality. But the script file, so the JavaScript file, is the one that I want to go into detail into. So this includes all the code that we'll be adding, including the ones that we'll be adding today. But I'll go back to the one that you guys have. So you guys have this one. Actually, before I go into to do that, I wanted to show you what it originally looked like. So the one I got from the YouTube video, it looked like this. So initial JS code, it looked like this. So are there any takers for what is like not so good about the code, the original code that looks like this? So think about like, yeah, so what Len said, comments, there was no comments. So I had to like understand the code from scratch and then figure out what was going on. Yeah, and the variable names aren't clear. Those are the two main things I was looking for. What is PX and what is GS? What does that mean? So I went through and I changed all the variable names and add comments so that it will make it a bit easier for you guys to look at, for you guys to understand it. And this is what it looks like now. That's what you guys are looking, that you guys have. And I'll go through the JavaScript running through what each of the components are. So canvas, we have some global variables here, and we have canvas and context and frame rate. Those will be set to, so those are the variables that will store the canvas elements and also the context of that canvas, which we'll set in start game, you'll see later. And then the frame rate is how many times the game function actually gets called. So the number of milliseconds that it will get called. Yeah. And then the other game variables are, so the initial position of the snake head, and the block size, which you would have seen before, or if you open the game.html in your browser, you would have seen the snake is made out of blocks, green blocks, and that's the size of those green blocks. And then the board size is the size of the board, so the board that the snake is running on. And even though the numbers are the same, because they're rendered slightly differently, they mean different things. And I haven't completely mastered like the proportions that are needed, but the 20 and 20 seems to work here, and then you can play around with it in your own time to sort of like change the size of things after this session. And then obviously we have the initial position of the apple, and then the movement of the movement of the snake in the X and Y direction, which is initially 0 because the snake isn't moving at the start. And then we have the trail, which is the array of all the different body blocks of the snake, and then initially how long the snake is. Okay, so when the window loads, so when game.html loads, the first function that gets called is this function. So that's because we set the onload property of the window to this function. And then this function is just like a wrapper function that calls start game. So actually when when the window loads, start game gets called. And what start game does is that it gets the canvas from the document and stores it in the global variable canvas, and then it gets the context of that canvas. And if you look in your notes, there's a link to the canvas documentation, and that just tells you what sort of things you can do with the canvas via its context. So in summary, what the canvas is like an area where you can draw graphics in using JavaScript onto the HTML page. And you can do a lot more things than what we are going to do today, but you can have a look at that in your own time in the link that I sent in the notes. When you go and And so after you get the canvas, you also add an event listener to the document, and this event listener listens for keyboard entries. So key down is like, it's like the event name for when the user presses the keyboard. And then it sets it that so that every time the user presses the key, it will call the key push function, which we'll have a look at at the bottom there. And then finally, it will also set interval, which is like, set interval is, it sets, it makes it so that this event or like this action repeats itself every frame rate number of milliseconds. So we saw a frame rate that we set above here. So the game function gets called every this number of milliseconds. And then following on, we'll go into the game function. But actually, before I move on, are there any questions in the chat right now? Are there any questions, or you can shout out as well? If not, I'll keep going. So the game function is where the meat of the whole game is. So it's like it contains the logic that facilitates the whole gameplay. So when you go, the first thing that happens in the game function is that the snake is moved. So the position X, and position Y, which is the head of the snake, is moved in the direction of movement X and movement Y. So accordingly to what it's set to in the key push function, which we'll see in a moment, but it moves it. And then if it sees after it's moved it, the snake has hit the edge, then it will wrap around the board. So if you see when you open the game.html in browser, if the snake runs off the edge, it will wrap around. So that's what this part does. So accordingly to whether it's hit the top, right, bottom, or left, it will wrap around accordingly. And then after that, the next thing it will do is that it actually renders the board. So first thing it does is it renders the whole canvas in black, which is why we see the black square. And then it renders the snake. And what it does to render the snake is that it goes through the entire trail array, which is each block of the snake has an entry in the trail array. And then it will render each of those as a square, which represents the body, one of the body blocks of the snake. And then that's what it does here. And then after that, it will add the logic for if the snake bites itself. So if any body part of the snake overlaps with another one, then it will have, that means it's biting itself. That means you reduce the tail back to 5, which is the starting length. And that's what it means to render the snake. And then the next part is that it will push the new head so that the snake has moved, right? At the start, the snake has moved in movement X and movement Y, and then it will add like a new block to the trail where the new head is. And then the most confusing part of this whole game function comes next, which is why there's like a massive comment block here, because it took me a while to get it. But this little while loop here, it removes the old part of the snake that was added on previously. So it just keeps adding on the new heads there. But then when it detects that the snake has gotten longer than what it's supposed to be, it just chops off the rest of it. And that's what makes the snake look like it's moving as a whole, whereas actually the code is just repeatedly adding new blocks where the new head of the snake is. And then it chops off the oldest blocks in like a first in, first out style to like sort of shift the snake along, make the snake look like it's shifting along as a whole. But if you wanted to see this in action, you can change the frame rate of the game and to like a slower one, and you'll be able to see how it does that. But that's all that part of the code does. And then finally, it renders the apple. So this is the whole part that deals with the apple. This is the part that detects whether the snake has eaten the apple. So if the snake has eaten the apple, so the position of the snake head and the apple is the same, then it will increase the tail length and also shift the apple to a new random position on the board. And then whether the apple was moved or whether it's not moved, you will have to obviously render the apple and put it on the game board. And that is the whole game function. That was a lot to take in, so hopefully that If there's any questions at this point, we'll answer them. No, that looks fine. So that's I'm glad you guys are taking this well. But lastly, before we move into actually making the features, the last part of the existing code is the key push function. So when the user presses a key on the keyboard, key push will get called, and what that does is that it takes in an event, which the event is like a bunch of information about what actually occurred. So in this case, our key push, and one of the pieces of information in the event is the key code of the key that was pushed. And we want to check that. And if it was any of the arrow keys, we want to move the snake accordingly. So looking at the 37 is the key code for the left arrow key. And when the left arrow key is pressed, we want to move the snake in towards the left direction. And to do that, we want to change movement X, which is the movement in the X direction horizontally, to -1, which will move it to the left. And then a similar thing happens for the rest of the different directions. Cool. So that is the whole existing code base so far. If there aren't any questions, we will move on to the first feature, which is the scoreboard. So as you saw before, if I show you again, we want to add a scoreboard that looks like this to the side of the game. The existing code base, the code base that you have obviously doesn't have this, and we want to go through the broad steps that I've listed in your notes, and then hopefully be able to add the scoreboard to your game. The first thing you want to do is to add the HTML to actually have the headings and the paragraph elements. So add the HTML that gives you the scoreboard text and the best score and the current score, and also obviously the places to put the actual score. So I'm going to give everyone 2 minutes to do that. So I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes, and then so you guys can get started, and then I will show you the solution to that afterwards. Okay. 2 minutes starting now. Meanwhile, if anyone has any questions at all regarding the code, regarding the notes, you can ask me as well. Okay, so now that 2 minutes is up, have everyone managed to add the HTML for the scoreboard? And so you can give some reactions to show me, let me know. Also, I forgot to mention that I do have some styles that I put in to the HTML, to style the scoreboard so that the font matches the heading, and also it's the padding, there's some padding between the scoreboard and the game, but that's also optional, so don't worry. So it doesn't affect the functionality, it just looks a little bit more consistent. But I can see that probably you guys are all working on it right now, but I'll show you what it's supposed to look like anyway, and then you guys can get a bit of a pointer if you're stuck, or just so that we can move on to the next part. But basically, what I did was I added an extra div, but that was for fun. That was just for the styling purposes. But what you really want to have is the like a scoreboard heading, and then after that, best score, the line that says best score, and then after that, and a line that says current score, and then between those two, like a p element, or like a place where you can actually put the score. And the reason why we have to have we should have the ID here, some sort of ID there, is that we can access that particular paragraph element from the JavaScript in order to dynamically fill in the scores and update them as the game goes on. So yeah, does everyone have something similar to this? You can message in the chat or give a reaction, or I'm going to keep going. Yep, thanks, Amron. Yeah, like it doesn't have to be exactly like what I have here, as long as it like sort of has the same the text there, and most importantly, some place where you can actually put the score. So the length of the score is the length of the snake that you have currently. Some place to put it there, and then that should be good. But then the next step that I've listed in your notes that you want to do is you want to add the JavaScript that will set up the scoreboard at the start of the game. So that, yeah, set up the scoreboard at the start of the game. So at the very start of the game, when the game gets set up, you want to also fill in the paragraph elements in the HTML page with the current score, which is obviously 5, or the length of the tail at the start of the game, and also the best score also needs to be filled with the score, or the score at the start of the game, because the best score is just the starting score at the start of the game. So I kept repeating start of the game because that was hinting to you where in the JavaScript code you need to add stuff. So when the game is set up at the start of the game, you need to update the best score and the current score p elements with 5, or the initial length of the tail. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to continue doing that, and then I will show you what the solution looks like. Three minutes starting now. Yeah, so to answer Amory's question, the current score is the current length of the snake. Yes, and it's based on how many apples eaten, because when the snake eats an apple, the length of the snake increases by 1. And then so increases when it eats another apple, obviously increases by another 1. And then we want to update it based on how many apples eaten. Okay, how's everyone going? I guess thumbs up or message in the chat if you're going good, if you think you're going good. And I guess also update how far you managed to get. Anyway, I will keep, otherwise I'm sure you guys are all busy typing away on your keyboard, so I'll keep going. But I switched back to the code that was the original code, so it doesn't actually have the input at the new scoreboard and the current score. But I just wanted to show you live how to do it on the JavaScript rather than just showing you like the written code. But basically, you want to change it in the start game function. You want to add some JavaScript here that will update the scoreboard to the initial state it should be at the start of the game. So what you want to do after the key push function, or it doesn't matter before or after, but you want to first grab the two input elements. Grab the two paragraph elements that you added, and then fill in those ones with the current score. So let's say current score let's grab the current score paragraph element first, then you can go get element by ID current score, if I can spell, score. And then after that, you want to also grab the best score element from the best score, from the document as well. So document.get element by ID best score. And then after that, you want to update. So what this current score variable now holds is the paragraph element that is where the score will go. And the way that you update the actual score and put it onto the HTML page is that you would have to go current score dot inner text or inner HTML. And the difference between these two is that inner HTML will add HTML code into the paragraph element, but inner text will just add like plain text. So in this case, we just want to add plain text. So we'll just go inner text, and that the current score is at the start of the game is just the length of the tail at the start of the game. So it's 5, or you can use the variable tail, which is the tail length, and then you put it in the inner text of the current score paragraph element. And then you want to also update the best score. And the best score is just the current score at the moment. So you can just do the same thing. So you go best score dot inner text is equal to tail. because right now the best score is just the best score is just the starting score, right? And so some extension feature that you could do after the session is that you could have some sort of persistent storage for the best score, so that every time the user comes back, they get their best score ever. So rather than their best score in the current session, they get their best score ever. But that's an extension task that you can work on after the session today. But yeah, so that's all the JavaScript that you need to add in terms of updating the scoreboard at the very start of the game. But the next thing that we want to do is that you want to update the scoreboard as the status of the game changes. And so when the status of the game changes, you want this also say the snake eats a new apple, you want to update the current score to the obviously the current score, which is the old score plus 1. And you also, and if the current score has bet the best score, you also want to update the best score to reflect the new best score. And that involves updating some part of the JavaScript where the game status gets updated. So I'm going to also give you another 3 minutes to work on that. Actually, can I get a pulse check? Is everyone going okay? Are there any questions? I'm sure everyone's just busy typing at the code. Oh, did I hear someone unmute?
Oh, that was just me. I was going to say, feel free to come off mute if you want to. Oh. Just, yeah, say how you're going. Even if you're lost or behind or anything. Amran says she's got a quick question.
Yeah.
Feel free to come off mute if you want, Amran.
Yeah, I just wanted to know what's the difference between inner text and inner HTML? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, so inner HTML is inner HTML lets you add HTML code between I'll add like a quick with the ID so I can show you. So ID is, so it was current score. So if I got the document by get element by the current score, which means I'll get this paragraph element. If I do .inner HTML, I can add HTML code between the paragraph tags here. And then that means, so if I wanted to add something like bold text, you can add bold text in HTML by doing the B tags. And then I could do something like, so say inner HTML, and then I could add a string with like B and then dash B like that, and then put some text between there. And then the text will actually come out bold in the HTML because it treats this as HTML code. That's what inner HTML means. But then if I just did inner text and I did the same thing, then it would come up in the HTML page as exactly as it came up here. So it won't be bold, it'll just have like the arrow B blah, 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 because it treats this as just text. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think I'll give everyone 1 more minute to see how far you get in terms of adding the code that updates the score according to the status of the game. Okay, so I'm going to keep going now. How's everyone going? Are there any questions at this point? If not, I'll demonstrate how to do the next part, which is obviously adding the updates to the score as the game progresses. So as I mentioned before, because you want to update it as to reflect the current status of the game, you want to do the updates in the game function, because that is every time something new happens in the game, it's the game function is what makes the new thing happen. So you want to update it here at the start of the game function, in fact, to reflect what happened in the last game function, the last course of the game function. So if the snake got longer in the last call, so the snake actually ate an apple the last time the game function was called, then you want to update the score to reflect that. So in the game function, you want to do the same thing, a similar thing to what you did in the start game function. And so actually just getting the element by ID and then updating the score. But before you do that, you want to see if the score actually updated. So if it's stayed the same, then there's no point in updating it, right? So you just want to check so you want to do a quick if block and check whether the score actually, sorry, I meant the best score. So if the best score was, it has updated, so the current score is now better than the best score, then you want to update the best score part of the, you want to update the best score part of the page. And so you want to check whether the current score is more than the best score. And then you would realize now that you haven't actually stored the best score anywhere. So that's why you would also need to add a variable here to actually track the best score so far, so that you can compare the current score with the best score and then see if you've actually bet the score. So you just do a best score and you make that equal to tail, which is the initially the best score is just the score at the start. And then you do, if tail is more than best score, then you want to do an update to the best score. You want to do an update to the best score best score paragraph element. So you would do the same thing. You would go best score, get the best score element, then do the inner text, and then put that to the current score. And then after that, you would update the best score variable to reflect what the new best score is. But regardless of whether you update the best score or not, you want to update the score to reflect what it is currently at the start of every call to game. So you would do that in a similar fashion by doing the inner text, but not best score, current score. And then you would put that to be equal to what it is currently. And that's the two places that you need to update in order for the scoring to work. Best score is also the HTML element as well as the variable. So yeah, so I'm sure you noticed what I did there differently to what I did previously. So previously I stored the element in a variable, then I put the inner text into the variable. But you can also, since you're not actually using the element anywhere else except for here, you can also just directly do it to the element rather than storing into a variable first, because then you don't have to, it's just more convenient, I guess, and also you don't have to create a variable that you're just not going to use after doing this part. Yeah, but either way it should work, whether you do exactly the same thing, so you create a variable first, then you do the inner text, or you do just directly like this, both of them should work. Yeah, now I'm going to, like that makes sense. I'm going to check out onto my branch, but then I'm just going to, before I do that, I'm going to just dash everything. But this is just me making sure that I can check out. I can move to the code that I initially had, so don't have to copy me here. And then I'm going to just move to, actually, before I do anything. And then I'm going to move to the scoreboard, and then I'll have all the code that I have. Yes, so as you can see, I added the inner text and the in the code that I wrote previously. I added the scores, and then I also updated the scores just like I did in the live demo. Okay, so have people got that working? But if not, that's okay too, because the code will be up on the GitHub link at the end of the session as well. Okay, I'm going to assume that everyone's going okay. But the next feature and the last feature that we'll be going through today is the pause and start buttons. So if I demonstrate the game again, if I demonstrate the game again, it has you can have a pause and a start button at the side here. So this is the more advanced option. So the start and the pause button are the same button, but the one I described in the notes is just to add two buttons, one that starts the game and one that pauses the game, depending on which one. Yeah, Paul, this is recorded, so we'll upload it to our YouTube channel and you can refer to it later as well. But yes, going back to, so I want you to add two buttons, a start button and a pause button, and then that will let you start and pause the game according to which button you click. Yeah, so going back to the code, you want to add, the first thing you want to do according to your notes as well, you want to add two buttons to the actual UI first, and then after you add those two buttons, the next thing you want to do is write the JavaScript and then link the buttons and the JavaScript together. So first of all, adding the two buttons, and I'll give you guys around 2 minutes to do that. 2 minutes to do that. Meanwhile, yes, fire away if you have any questions. Yeah, to answer Jacob's question, the Notion write-up, so we do have notes that we sent out, and I think you would be looking at that as well. But I know it's very high level, but in terms of the code, we'll put the whole code, everything that I've added, that includes all the 3 features, to the GitHub, and hopefully alongside the notes there, you would be able to see the things that were required to add. Yep. So how is everyone going? I'm going to share my code again, and then this one will have the buttons added. So what you wanted to do was you add 2 buttons on the page, one for pause game and one for start game. And then it doesn't matter if you don't have this on-click stuff yet, because that's the next step. And that is to write the JavaScript functions that will actually pause the game and start the game on click of the button. So you want to think about what is actually causing the game to run. So hint, the game function gets called every every set number of milliseconds, and you want to kind of stop that from happening if you want to pause it. And then when you start it, you want that to restart that. And so you might want to look up the set interval function, and then how you can clear that, and how you can like stop that set so you can like cancel that set interval that you set at the start of the game. And that's when you pause, and then when you want to start, you want to restart that again. So hopefully that is a hint, and that's what you, and then I'm going to give you another like 2-3 minutes for you to try that, and then I'll show you the code that I wrote to do that. Okay, so hopefully you were able to make a start, or start thinking about how you could actually pause and start the game. But I'm going to show you what the code should look like. Yeah, so the pause game, so as you saw in the HTML code, this pause game button is linked to a pause game function that fires every time the button is clicked, which is given by the onClick property. And then that button is, and that pause game function is basically just looks like this. So really simple, one line of code. What it does is that it clears the interval. If you search up clear interval function in Google, it would show you that this one just clears the whatever set interval did. So what gameplay holds, so I realized that I couldn't clear the interval unless the interval was actually stored. And then previously, the set interval function was just called at the end of the start game function, and it wasn't actually stored anywhere. But what I did was that I made a variable called gameplay, and then when the interval gets set, so set interval game frame rate, I stored it in gameplay. And then so then later on, when the pause game function is called, I can then clear that interval, and then that will stop stop calling the game function, which means the game pauses on the UI. And then so that's what the pause game function does. And then when I go and then the start game function, so the button that restarts the game after it's paused, what that function is linked to is this one. So it's just one line of code again, and what it does is just resets the interval to what it was. So the same line of code that appears at the original start game function at the end. So it sets it so that the game function is called at every frame rate number of milliseconds. And then you would have seen that in the course of doing the start button, I also did some refactoring. So what I did was initially the onload, it was just calling start game, but then I refactored the code that was setting up the canvas and setting up the context, and also adding the key down and setting up the scoreboard to another function called setup game, so that when I do the setup, so that when I restart the interval every time I click the start button, I don't like to have to do all of this again, because this stuff doesn't change. The only thing that changes is the set interval. So then I moved that stuff into a separate function that I called when the game starts, and then I moved the set interval into a separate function called left the set interval in the start game function, and then that's the function that will get called both when the game starts for the first time, and also when the user clicks the start button to start the game again after they pause it. And then that is what happens there. Does anyone have questions on how that works? No, that looks good. Hopefully I haven't lost you guys there. But I'm going to, can I explain pause game? Yeah, I can explain pause game. So pause game uses the clear interval function, and what the clear interval function does is that it clears the interval that's stored in gameplay. So a clear interval is not a function that I wrote myself. It's an inbuilt JavaScript function, and it works together with set interval. So when you set an interval, the set interval function returns the interval that can be stored. So I stored that in a variable called gameplay, which is global, and then I will and then when I call clear interval and I pass gameplay to it, it will then stop the interval that causes game to be called every frame rate number of milliseconds. At the bottom here, which then pauses the game. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. And then I wanted to, before we wrap up, I wanted to show you, so after you add the pause game and the start game function, and also the on click and the buttons, is what the game will look like, will be like this. Let me refresh and I'll show you. So it would look like this. So you have a pause game and start game function, and then obviously you will have the game moving. And then if you pause it, it'll pause. And if you press start game, it will also start again. You can keep going. And if I eat the apple, yeah, the scores will go up as well. Yeah. So I think, because it's approaching 6 o'clock, I think we'll wrap up now. I will show my code, because just in case you guys want to copy anything down before we wrap up. But we have a feedback form that we'd like you to fill out to let us know how we went, and then also give us ideas, and also let us know what events you want to see us run in the future. So we really appreciate that if you would fill it out. And I think we're going to send it in the chat, and it's also linked in your notes. So please do fill that out. And the code will be, once again, the code will be uploaded to the GitHub link that's linked in the notes as well, with the complete code, so you can have a look at it in detail and then play around with it, add extra stuff to it if you want. And yes, thanks Paul, thanks, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I hope that it was enjoyable to you, and hope to see you guys at the next workshop, next event. Also taking any last minute questions if you guys want to hear, if you guys have any. Yeah, if there are no questions, yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time.